Fancast. I'm Fro.
And I'm Celes.
And welcome to our ongoing coverage of the spring 2018 season review for all the anime that was released during that season. If you are watching this video on YouTube, hopefully you can check out the rest of our recordings for other shows this season as part of the YouTube playlist I'm setting up for all of our reviews. And you can also find the rest of them on our Mixcloud page. But basically, we're going to talk about a pair of shows in this episode, give you a little synopsis about what they're about, talk about what worked and what didn't work, and with that, and of course, while you're listening to this episode and you have any questions or thoughts or concerns, please email us at lapsedfancast@gmail.com with any of your questions, thoughts, if there are any series you want us to cover or whatnot. As well as if you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe to the video. And with that, Celes, do you have any thoughts about just from the onset about the two shows we're going to be talking about in this episode?
Sleeper hits.
Yeah.
I feel like the theme of today's show is.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll start off with my sleeper hit of the season, Musume. Musume Pretty Derby is a story about horse girls. If you didn't know, the literal translation of Musume is horse girl. So there you go. And by horse girls, I mean anthropomorphic girls with equine features like long horse ears and horsetails, wearing hooves over their boots, horseshoes over the boots as though they have hooves, and when they race, and having a particular fondness for carrots and other such popular horse treats as character traits. In the world of Musume, horse girls are firmly at the center, especially when it comes to the culture of horse girl races in this loosely fictionalized version of Japan in our world. This is why we follow young racehorse Special Week as she transfers mid-year, so you can check that off of your typical anime trope checklist box, into the illustrious Tracing Academy to learn how to become the best horse girl in all of Japan. Having never before seen another horse girl in her life, we get to learn about the world of Musume through spe-chan's eyes. As Special Week fosters friendships, engenders rivalries, and joins a ragtag team of vivacious horse girls who each race with a particular flair, we get to see her develop from being a wide-eyed but unsure racehorse, volleying from confident to a nervous wreck with each positive or negative race result, to a supremely empowered one who is able to take on the challenge of becoming the best horse girl in Japan. Running for 13 episodes, like the little pun, running, Musume was produced by by PA Works, the long-running studio giant responsible for shows like Angel Beats, Shirobako, The Eccentric Family, and another. And the production was in conjunction with Cygames, which is a mobile game producer. There is an Musume mobile game tied to this series that has yet to be officially released, although you can find a lot of concept work and images and even some sequences online if you look. And that essentially makes this release kind of an interesting experiment in terms of whether the anime is an adaptation of the game or the other way around, technically speaking. But, the show, jam-packed full of gags, horse girls, and thrilling races. Musume is by far and away the series I least expected to like, but, spoiler alert, I definitely did like this show. How about you, Celes?
I felt that this show was strong in its core aspects, but it was very weak everywhere else. Special Week as a character and the team trainer and Silent Suzuka have really good and fleshed out character arcs. Less so the trainer, but still better than the rest of the cast. But everywhere around the edges, it's just it feels like, did you run out of time? Did you Did you not put enough thought into it? Because it feels like a lot of wasted potential.
Which is funny because, like, from the onset, this show, I mean, when it was announced, more or less, it was definitely kind of like everyone's more or less like, this seems like maybe it's going to be like Monster Musume or like something else where it's going to be instantly forgettable and way too try hard in the premise of its weird pandering otaku feature. But I I mean, whoever wound up with the task of like doing the plotting and storyline execution and direction really deserves a raise, because they took what could have been an unmitigated disaster and made something really enjoyable out of it.
Absolutely. This was one of the shows I was always most looking forward to watching throughout the season.
Really? Oh, once you started watching it.
Yeah, once I was like 2 or 3 episodes in, I was always waiting for the next episode to come out.
For sure. Actually, can we talk about the first episode in the series? Because, I mean, obviously, we're the kind of anime consumers, especially in a season with so many shows and so many older shows to try and catch up on, where if something isn't able to really at least give some kind of hope that the time we're going to invest in this is going to turn out to be wasted, we'll give it a shot, but we have no fear or reservations about dropping shows after one episode. And
Sure.
Uma Musume doesn't really have the backing or the premise set up or anything else hype wise behind it to really sustain any kind of to use another horse pun, stumbling out of the starting gate.
Gotta stop, bro. Please, by your head.
I'm a couple of horse lengths ahead. Okay, I'll stop.
No.
But really, like tuning in. I tuned in to watch the show based off of seeing a clip about it posted to Crunchyroll's Twitter account, and just being like, "Oh, this actually looks really cool. I wonder if it's good." And the first episode is just excellent. It's definitely probably one of the best first episodes of shows this year. In this first episode, I'm going to rattle off some stuff. We get the premise in full, that there are horse girls, that there's the whole culture of horse girls, how they exist in this world, the school and the system of racing, as well as our main protagonist's goals. Then we also get an introduction to our secondary protagonist, which is Silent Suzuka, and the coach, the colorfully named Trainer-san, spe-chan's other less narratively important but still crucial rivals in El Condor Pasa, Cyan Sky, and Grass Wonder, the two rival teams of horses, Team Rizal and Team Spica, as well as spe-chan establishing herself as a dark horse, another pun, contender among the newer horse girls, trying to vie for the attention of those two teams by racing against one another in a well-attended practice race, which culminates in the rest of Team Spica kidnapping spe-chan in order to have a meeting with her, and Trainer-san convincing her to join, revealing that Suzuka had also joined the team, and that they'll prepare for her race next week. And that would be great, except that the show even goes beyond that by executing a really wonderfully done cut of just on spe-chan's face to the actual starting gate for that race the following week, where spe-chan has the same like nervous with trepidation face, and winds up like getting yelled at a boisterous horse girl in the next pen, and then exclaiming, "What? Nani?" right before the whistle blows and the episode ends. It's just really well done. What did you think?
I think it's a good first episode. It kind of like introduces everyone who matters. I'm gonna be honest with you. I didn't remember this first episode until you were talking about it, and I was like, "Yeah, what a great first episode."
I mean, we watched a lot of stuff this year. this season. But yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about is that I really enjoyed a lot of the visual aspects of this show. When it came to character design, I felt that the visual features differentiating each girl were exemplary, as each one's combination of horse-inspired hair, such as the myriad of two or more head colors for the head of hair, that's like very much like inspired by like how horses have different like um little stripes of color too. um as well as, accoutrements like ribbons and hair ties that are striking, or they are as striking and defining as they are asymmetrical in some cases. Show off one of the show's, in my opinion, one of its best features, which is the character design. And I mean, this show does trade in the idol genre essentially, so that's essential. So that like they got that down pat. What'd you think?
I thought the character designs were pretty great. It was always easy to tell like different characters apart from one another. Like even in the case where you have like McQueen and Goldship,
Yes.
where they have very similar character designs. Goldship always stands out because she's a foot taller. So they always like take care to do these things to make the characters easily recognizable, even if you forget who they are because they're unimportant background characters.
Also, so again, we mentioned that the show also has idol aspects, and that comes directly from the game, as well as the fact that, at least initially in the first 3 or 4 episodes, basically once you would place in a race, you would also essentially perform. You would earn the ability, the opportunity to perform a song for the crowd in like a full idol setup with the second and third place finishers. I mean, again, who knows how in the world that's supposed to make sense, but hey, they essentially they use it really to kind of help play up spe-chan's fish out of water aspects in the first couple of episodes, and then after that, pretty much after episode 3 or 4, they drop it entirely for the rest of the season, and it's strictly a sports show.
It's kind of unfortunate. I feel like if they wanted to drop something specifically, they should have dropped the school aspect, and they did eventually, but it was always kind of there in the background. But the school setting never mattered. It was really kind of strange, a strange decision. I felt like they should have just like focused on the horse racing. And if they hadn't bothered with the school setting, maybe they could have focused a little more on the idol aspect as well. Not that I'm like an expert or really knowledgeable about anything in idol culture.
Yeah, I mean, like, my thing is that they wound up dropping the school stuff in full pretty much around the same time, too. Like, there's a lot of school-centric stuff, especially in episodes 1 and 2. But after that point, the school winds up just being there as a setting for, like, character interactions for the most part, and where the characters live. So instead of it being more of, like, a weird hurdle that the storyteller, in order to clear the story, I didn't really feel it that way. But I mean, I do agree that the show definitely has some weaknesses that probably could have been punched up. My weird pet theory with this show is that there was a lot of on the fly decision making at the start, and then they were just like, let's just focus as much as we can on just a short number of characters, and just try and show off as many appealing horse girls as possible in order to get people to buy our game. That seemed to be it. But
one thing that I felt was really odd about the pacing of the show and like the general direction was, it seemed like in every race there was a new rival, someone who Spe was like working against, or even Suzuka. The kind of like, who's gonna be the real contender here, right? And they kept pulling characters out of nowhere, or characters who had only been like mentioned once. I'm like, oh, this is the character who's like really gunning for this. Are they gonna win? I don't know. I've never seen them before. I don't really know why I feel any tension about a character who nobody knows.
Yeah, so that brings us to one major hurdle about this show that probably wound up constraining a lot of it, which is that, as the show makes evident, the names of the horse girls and the spirits that essentially, they themselves are actual horses that existed in our reality. All the horses that are named after actual racehorses that raced in Japan. And there was, apparently, from what I've seen in discussions, a lot of, and maybe not promises necessarily, but a lot of the horses had to be characterized in a, let's just say, not unflattering light, as well as when it came to the races, for the majority of the races that occur in the show, they have to be modeled after historical races that happened, both in order to tell really the story of Special Week and the story of Silent Suzuka, which are two integral stories, or two very special and permanent or prominent stories in the world of actual professional horse racing history in Japan. But in order to ensure that none of the other horses would be sullied in spirit by having, fake races done, essentially, it's unfortunate. If it, again, no, there's not been an article I can refer to that makes this explicit, but I've seen enough of it brought up to know that apparently there was some internal pressure to make sure that they weren't making any horse that didn't lose a race to another horse lose that race, but instead portray it as accurately as done in history. And part of that actually is accomplished by bringing on board a famous Japanese horse race commentator. The taller woman in the broadcast booth is actually a horse race broadcaster, I believe.
The hypecaster, the commentator.
I think it's the commentator.
I liked her character a lot.
Yeah. She's legitimately an actual horse race commentator. So,
nice.
And relied on commentary from those races. So this is a weird show in that having prior knowledge of actual Japanese racehorse history spoils you, but also might increase your enjoyment of the show. And it's a very specific period of Japanese racehorse history, I think it's the 90s, but also all these horses that are in the show lived at wildly varying different periods of time for the last 60 years. So there's that too. So, and then the funniest thing is that so some of the horses are still alive, and part of it is in order to, part of the portrayal of the characters is in order to retain their value. But the funniest thing in the world is that the actual Special Week horse died on the week the show premiered. So it's just well, you can only control so much in the real world, I guess.
I think there's some value in hanging on a historical portrayal and leaning on that as content. But I think you can really see the limitations too.
Absolutely.
And the way that Musume progressed.
But I will say this. The fact that they did have to follow some historical procedures means that our main character actually loses races, which is good. That's important. One of the things that could be really a drag on sports anime in particular, but most pre-standard competition or battle-oriented anime, is if you have a main character who is invincible. It's boring. And Special Week loses badly in a couple of cases. And in a couple of cases, they're really well executed narratively. So
I remember when I started watching this, one of my biggest complaints up to episode 4 or 5-ish was that Special Week had always come in first. And I was not interested in that narrative. But when she starts losing, she loses for episodes on end. Over and over and over again. And then miraculously is number 1.
I mean, we talked about that in a second. Yeah, it does seem a little bit out of nowhere. But I do want to say about the horse races themselves, for a sports anime, it's good to have the actual competition itself be the best defining feature of the show. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, the horse races in Musume are hype as shit. Like they're
I don't
like
even know how they're hype. Like they just are.
like you're just like sitting there and like you can feel like your heart racing as the tension builds up, and then in the best moment of each episode almost.
Dude, they do it every time too. They actually like pull the same trick over and over and over, and it still manages to be hype every single time.
Because as soon as you realize they're about to do the slowdown of the race, where the main character horse, typically it's Suzuka, or typically it's Special Week, but sometimes Suzuka, just gets right into the zone to make their move around one final stretch of the race course, and everything slows down to a crawl right as they are just about to kick it into high gear, and their feet plants on the ground, and then everything just rockets, and it sounds like a jet engine taking off each time. And I know some people actually have been complaining about the audio compression issues, especially with just how loud some of the moments in the actual races are compared to the rest of the audio throughout each episode, which I can understand that's something that wound up plaguing folks, but I never found it to be a problem for me, although I did notice it a couple of times where I was like, oh shit, I need to click down the audio a little bit on my stereo. But basically every time, that is that combination of anticipating when the horse girl is going to make her move with that specific visual and auditory cue of the foot stepping down. It's such a simple mechanic that rewards the viewer, and you're just like, fuck yes, when they like kick off. That's, great.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting was the way Suzuka races, where she just goes 120% from the moment she starts, and nobody can catch up to her. Whereas in every other race, it seems like there's a point somewhere around the third bend where somehow our girl makes her move, but no one else seems to. Like I said, it's hype as shit every time. I just think that there's like, kind of like...
There's a couple of times where that gets subverted, though, especially the race against Grass Wonder, where Grass just manages to hold off Suzuka, or hold off...
Is that the hill episode?
That is not the hill episode, which I think Suzuka, or that spe-chan still wins. No, this is later on.
Sky one?
Seiren Sky won either the hill or the one right after the hill. Grass Wonder won the race more towards later on in the season when Special Week's preoccupied with Suzuka. It's the episode where it's like... So I think it's episode 8, which I want to talk about in a second. But Grass Wonder manages to hold her off. Let's see here. So, character-wise, I really enjoyed Special Week. She is very much Genki sports protag that's not obnoxious at all, really, in my opinion. She's not like a complete moron. She's kind of a spaz, but she's also a really good-natured spaz that cares deeply about her friends, as well as making her mothers proud. And that's, again, that's important. That's right. Spe-chan has 2 moms, which is a really interesting feature of this show.
Wasn't one just adoptive, though?
Yeah. I mean, the way that the whole conception of horse girls works, it's bizarre as all hell. So, but yeah, essentially adopted mom. But that narrative through line that Special Week has to be the best horse girl in Japan is given solid foundation in the show by mentioning in one episode, emphasizing her relationship with her mom.
That's true. That's very true.
Character writing wise, the show's narrative crutch is especially the relationship between Silent Suzuka and Special Week. Their relationship first formed as admirer and admiree, with Suzuka being the first racehorse that Special Week sees ever win a race, which is a big ordeal for both characters in a sense. Then becomes the two of them being roommates at the school. Then, as in something of like a mild kohai senpai kind of relationship, although they never use the terms, which then blossoms into a respectful rivalry, if not borderline, possibly romantic.
There's nothing there. I don't know where anybody gets
I think
that
maybe,
feeling.
possibly, kind of.
No.
They care for one another. And it's really beautiful, okay? It's very
They do
beautiful to
care,
me.
but there's definitely no attraction between them.
They love each other a lot. Okay. Um, uh, I really, really like Suzuka's
Bro, you
character.
can fish in that pond all you want. You're not gonna
I
catch
will fish in
anything.
that pond for an eternity. um, I really, really like Suzuka. By far and away is my favorite character of the show. So I'm gonna gush a lot about her. But basically, Suzuka is kind of comes off, at least initially, as a very much like a kudere stereotype of being a very silent but resolute kind of horse girl. But like even before she's informed about Special Wheat's unorthodox upbringing by one of the older horses, Fuji Kiseki, Suzuka is genuinely caring and concerned about her. You can see it especially in the first episode, in the first training session, so on and so forth. And that's in the second episode, actually. Sorry. So when Fuji Kiseki basically tells her, pulls her aside and says, take care of Special Wheat. She's never been around other horse girls before. From that point on, Suzuka is essentially Special Wheat's number one fan and arch rival, which is a really interesting dynamic. Suzuka not only wants to be the best horse girl possible, but she wants to be an inspirational horse girl. She says that, like, matter of factly, like, she wants to inspire other horse girls. And in spe-chan, for most of the series, she sees someone enamored with her own grace as a runner and doesn't want to ever see Special Wheat become discouraged or discouraged to the point of quitting, especially as Special Wheat's losses seem to start really getting to her. I mean, again, like the fact that she really cares from the start is cool, and I also don't feel like Suzuka's there as fodder. She's never like from like a scene, or like when all the other team speaker girls are like just doing random comedic shit. Suzuka's around smiling and laughing, and she's never like ostracized for like being too, I don't know, quiet about it. Yeah, for sure. And like seeing her race is just a thrill.
The only time Suzuka loses a race is when she breaks her fucking leg.
Which is important.
It is. It's an important plot point.
Because
I'm gonna sum all of that up really quick, if you don't mind.
By all means.
I feel like the one thing that kept Uma Musume like worth watching, the one thing that I kept coming back for, the one thing that gave this an overall positive score, which it got a positive score for me, was the character story between Spe and Suzuka and their rivalry. Simple as it is, it's been done 100,000 times, but it just really worked in this for me. I don't know if there's any special aspect about it other than cute girls doing horse girl things. But it's a classic character story. Two rivals inspiring each other to be better,
with one having a distinct amount of experience over the other and trying to serve as a source of inspiration. And in my opinion, it's all these factors that make episode 7 so freaking devastating. Silent Suzuka sprinting several lengths ahead of the pack in one of the I want to say it's one of the Triple Crown races. It's one of the like really important races that helps determine who the best horse girl in Japan is. As she's several lengths ahead of the pack, just like screaming ahead, nobody has a chance. Like, we've never seen a race like this before. Just how far ahead of the pack she is. Winds up pulling up with a terrible leg injury.
She had a stress fracture in her bones, right?
Yeah. And as she pulls up, spe-chan hops the barrier and helps assist her to keep from, worsening the injury. The lead up to this whole scene, this whole race, is just this really well executed combination of foreshadowing. There's a very typical your shoes untied scene, which is like a old. It's a tried and true red flag for injury in sports media, whether it's television or movies or so on and so forth. And a real foreboding sense of tension, even as it seems like Suzuka is just going to nail it and win it. Because when it just happens, it's heartbreaking. That episode affected you, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was like kind of crushed.
I was very sad.
Even though I knew it was coming, I was just like, "Oh, this is really happening. Please, no."
Yeah, it's
And
really upsetting.
that that event drives the episode, like the next like 4 episodes worth of content. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, one of the things that's important to note is that, again, referring back to how the show draws on actual historical circumstances, the actual racehorse Sound Suzuka basically it's a 1-for-1 from the actual race where she nearly destroyed the pack and got injured and had to be put down. So there's a little historical horse history for the folks that watch the show. And so, yeah, and it really and Suzuka's injury leads into episodes 8 and 9, kind of like starting to resolve just everybody's feelings about Suzuka's injury and trying to move on. And episode 8 is, in my opinion, and one of the reasons why I rate the show so highly, you often get like an injury arc where a character is trying too much, but it's often pointed out in a really ham-fisted way that that person is not actually helping in the situation, but making things worse or not being able to help at all. And this episode, there's so many characters that are like fully aware that Special Week is basically kind of like over engaging to the point of like turning her care of Suzuka while she rehabs into something very toxic. And it kind of comes out of her, like, I guess, like her admiration and love of Suzuka, but it's still kind of a poisonous thing, ultimately, especially for spe-chan's own unique goals as a horse girl. She dotes after Suzuka, even after Suzuka starts to be able to start running on her own. And meanwhile, spe-chan just loses race after race. And Suzuka kind of feels like she doesn't know really what to do, too, about it. This kind of codependency displayed by spe-chan distracts her from her original goal, her defining motivation of becoming the best horse girl in Japan. And it's really tough to see her struggle when so many other girls, especially like her would-be rivals in El Condor Pasa and Sand Sky and Grass Wonder, make it really painfully obvious that she's putting too much time and effort into taking care of Suzuka, who can take care of herself pretty well at this point in her rehab. And Suzuka isn't capable of telling spe-chan she's done more than enough for her, because Suzuka is also, again, still going through her own shit with regard to her injury and whether or not she feels like she can race again.
It's in this group of episodes. I think they do something really vital for the show, and they take some time in this group of episodes to kind of work on another character, which is El Condor Pasa. She ends up being like my third favorite character in the show, just because of how strong, even if minor, how strong her little arc is. She wins a race, and then she gets to go and compete in France. And we get to follow her little journey up to coming in second place against someone who's like unbelievably strong.
Yeah, El Condor Pasa is used in an interesting way. So she, I forget if she races Special Week and one of Special Week's losses, but I think she does. But essentially, El Condor Pasa has this like undefeated streak going, more or less, and she's gonna lose that streak in the race. She actually races in the same race that Suzuka's injury happens and winds up winning it. But she
That's right.
But when they go to like her on the podium, like she has this face where she's like it's a Pyrrhic victory essentially. Like she won, but she didn't win because Suzuka kicked her ass, and she knows it, and she would have lost, and it's all over her face. And the horse she meets in France is Broya, who winds up joining the cast at the end of the series. Also, probably chiefly responsible for one of the worst aspects of the show as a French speaker, which is the French to Japanese to English translation from watching the subs. And holy shit, do they get everything wrong. But I don't want to, like, that is such a minor nitpick. All I'm going to say is, please, Crunchyroll, get your shit together. Oh my god. This is the reason why fan subs exist. And so Broye is essentially brought in as like a major final antagonist, but not really one that Special Week interacts with once she gets her final motivation to really go for that goal of winning the best horse girl in Japan. This is one of the weaknesses of the show, which is that the basic fundamentals of progressing from race to race is not handled in any detail.
It's not really there.
They explain some of it at the beginning of the show. Let me see. I wrote down something here. Essentially, this goal of becoming the best horse girl in Japan is a little ephemeral in the end. Like,
it's kind of like a stock goal. It's just like something you give your protagonist of your sports.
Yeah.
You have nothing else to cling on to.
Well, I mean, they do give this basic explanation of there being 4 tiers of racing amid this Twinkle series and the G1 through 3 level races, but they never follow up on like whether or not winning a race qualifies you for another race or whatnot. And so, I mean, everything winds up coming back to that Twinkle series race at the end of the series, I'm pretty sure, but ultimately it's a little hard to follow exactly why which horse is entered for what. And again, this is predicated on actual horse racing history, so it's weird to me that they couldn't come up with a reason for explaining why certain horses were racing certain races in show, whether or not it would just be like really quick flashes to qualifying races or something. Or even explaining that, like,
so much there'd be no time for that.
Okay, maybe not that, but like at least maybe having like one cutaway shot of like trainer son going and like saying, this is the horse I want to enter into the race. So it made sense that there's like the teams get to quote like enter in horses or something like that. And so they do that, but it's not ever done like some kind of official pretense. It's just trainer san telling spe-chan she's going to race in this race, and then it happens. So, I mean, there's also like this minor story about becoming a Triple Crown horse, and that might lead to becoming the best horse girl in all of Japan, but it's abandoned pretty much as soon as like spe-chan starts to lose. So I think it was tied into like how like you have to be like a first year horse in order to win the Triple Crown kind of, and as soon as you lose a major race, that's it. And spe-chan loses one of those major races to Saiyan Sky. So Saiyan Sky is also a really cool character design. I like her a lot as a rival.
I like her character design, but she's abandoned so quickly.
Yeah, it's really strange, especially because she's like actually competitive with Special Week. Let's see here. So yeah, let's talk about the best moment for Trainer San, which is episode 9, as part of this whole like little sequence of episodes. So Trainer San, for the most part, has a couple of what could be described as horribly ecchi moments with some of the horse girls. It's not a lot that's bad. It's not nearly as bad as other shows can wind up having an older male character treat other female characters, but it's still something you have to be aware of, especially because it's horse themed.
I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, well, I keep on getting like chastised with gifts from it, so I have to like. Anyway, Trainer San
definitely 100% never done that to you ever.
Anyway, Trainer San has his moment in the sun as in episode 9, where he takes the team out to do some more unorthodox training, and he tries to forcibly separate spe-chan and Suzuka into 2 groups with the other girls, which gives the other girls some purpose and some screen time, which is nice. And by the end of the day, nothing's worked in terms of like trying to get them to get their shit together. And so he basically, at the end of this like long marathon run to the sea, the 2 of them have fallen behind, and spe-chan's worried that Suzuka might have hurt herself, so she's staying behind, and Trainer San's like, you need to fucking accomplish your own goddamn goal. You were competing with, basically like that. He has this big speech, and the two girls resolve, like, it's not like don't care about each other. There's nothing weirdly subversively bad about what he's saying. It's not like you can't be friends with your teammates on the squad, but everybody here has a place because they're trying to accomplish something, and you two are not. You do not have your heads in the game in terms of accomplishing it. And then they're like, yeah, and then they start running, and then Suzuka laps everybody. It's great.
It was a good episode. I liked it. It's a good way to segue into the end game of the show too.
Yeah, and I mean, if the end game winds up being Suzuka wins a fictionalized race against another fictionalized horse, so that nobody is mad in real life, just to show like, yeah, I can race again. And we get a bit more time with Broya as she comes overseas to race the Japanese racehorses in the same race that spe-chan's did a race in to prove her worth. And that's episode 11, which is the penultimate episode in the series. And that race is dope because spe-chan just like through the power of like one of the best little gags, all the other horse girls on the team like trying to send positive energy. Like,
oh yeah,
like they're making some kind of onomatopoeia. It's great. Through everybody encouraging Special Week, but especially Suzuka encouraging Special Week, she has enough to hold off Broye and win the I think it's like the Japan Cup thing, and
Japan Cup.
Yeah, and winds up qualifying for all the dope ass horses race at the end of in the final episode, which is again continuing this weird theme of the season of like penultimate episodes being dope and final episodes being very kind of okay. The last episode of the show is just more or less an excuse. It's forgettable. It's an excuse to show off every horse girl that they want to show off for marketing the game. And that's about it. I mean, you could say it resolves storylines, but I'm doing giant air quotes over here. Like it doesn't for the extended cast. I mean, again, that's a small criticism I have for the show. I wish that they, pitted spe-chan, Grass Wonder, El Condor Pasa, and Sand Sky a little bit more frequently, but I mean, that's, again, what can you do if the restraints I mentioned earlier are for real? And I would say, in terms of the visual presentation, most everything's great. A nitpicky one would be that the CGI of the girl group shots is pretty rough. I mean, it's like citrus group shot level kind of rough CGI where it's CGI and you're just like, come on, PA Works, come on. But that's probably the one. It clashes with all the like background design and everything. Especially because this show's got such great visual flair, colors just popping off the screen everywhere, great visual faces and gags and bouts of animation. It's wonderful. Celeste, do you have any other chief criticisms you wanted to address?
I think I said it earlier, but really the main like pull away from this show, the main criticism is just there's so much wasted potential.
Which is a weird thing to say about a show like this with this premise.
Yeah, it could have been way better. Like I was thinking about characters while you were talking, and one of the things that I feel like could have been a really like engaging character story would have been some drama between Trainer and Hana, the female trainer of Team Riga. They are always talking. They're always in the same room. They've clearly got a history together, but it's like ignored. It's just abandoned before it even begins.
Yeah.
It's like that could have been a really great story to tell. Grass Wonder abandoned. McQueen and Goldship abandoned.
Yeah.
Siren Sky abandoned. It's just like you could have done something, anything with these character stories and made something great.
Yeah.
But instead you end up getting a kind of like simple story that we've seen 100 times, executed well enough, but nothing stand out, nothing that's like...
Yeah, for sure, I understand.
I feel like this shouldn't be anyone's 10 out of 10.
No. This is coming from somebody who rated the show as 7 out of 10. I thought it was phenomenal. I recommend it highly, and I think the show's going to have a lot of rewatchable value, too. One other thing I did have as a criticism for the show, and again, this might be tied to the directors and producers, so on and so forth, writers having their hands tied in terms of how to portray the characters. But a lot of the competition and rivalry in the show is very respectful kind of rivalry, except for the first episode or the second episode, wherein spe-chan races against a fictionalized horse. It's not real, not based off a racehorse, a real racehorse, that like employs a bunch of dirty tricks and tactics. And there's also this inclusion of like a hill in like the second race too, and there's just like there's a lot of room that could have been used for differentiating the races by either having like the rivals engage in actual physical tactics, or making the races like different by way of how short or long they are, or if there are other obstacles like the hill in the race in the fourth episode. So
yeah, I think there's again, wasted potential. You know, a lot of the races in the end, even if they were hype, they felt very similar because it was the same track almost always. They never really go into any strategy beyond, oh, they're going to make their move, whatever that means. You know, they're not talking about like, okay, well, we need to keep this breathing rhythm and we need to go this fast at this point, and then we can go a full-on sprint for the last quarter mile. But if it's this track, we can't do that because there's a mud, you know, there's so much that they could have done.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you really want to be constrained by historical context, you didn't need horse girls for that. You could have just made an anime about horse racing and no one would have watched it.
To be fair, I mean, Joey, the anime dude, made a video talking about just how incredibly lucrative the horse racing market, or part of his conceit about the show possibly being a secret genius show, is that the horse racing market in Japan is like $2.5 billion annually, and the idol market is clearly one of the most financially viable markets in Japan for otakus. So in combining the two of them, it's like, well, they're definitely willing to settle on limitations story-wise in order to get a product out there. And that's how it is with these kind of collaborations. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. I feel like there was a lot of wasted potential here too.
Yep. As a show, it was okay. I enjoyed it.
You gave it a 5 out of 10, right?
I ended up giving it a 6 out of 10.
Yay!
You know, somehow it made me hype about horse racing. I felt like the central conflict and character story was well executed. I just felt like I wanted to give it a better score. I really enjoyed it. I was hyped for this show. It's just there's so many problems.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully we did a good enough job elaborating on those problems, because there are a few. And with that, I think what we'll do is we'll transition to the other show in this episode that is more or less loosely themed around sleeper hits, surprising hits of the season, and that is Mahou Shoujo Ore. And with that, Celes, I'll let you take it away with the show synopsis.
Mahou Shoujo Ore is a magical girl parody show. The premise being that a magical girl can call on love power to suddenly transform into a magical girl. The catch is, the magical girl is not a girl at all. It's actually just a buff dude who beats the shit out of everything in completely comical bloodbaths. The main character, Saki, ends up falling in love with, what's his name? Mohito. And that's how she gets to transform. Mohiro's sister, Sakuyo, is in love with Saki. And one of the best moments of the show is her coming up and saying, "I'm in love with Saki," and transforming into a magical girl.
Yeah. What kind of what do they do outside of the magical girl stuff? Like, what's kind of like what is Mohiro's thing?
Mohiro's an idol boy. He's part of like a boy band singing group. There's a couple of like surrounding characters, but ultimately the aim of this show is to just be a parody of the entire magical girl genre, and it succeeds brilliantly at it.
Yeah. There's a couple other character relations. So, Sakuyo and
Oh,
I'm sorry, I totally spoke over you. My bad.
no, it's fine. It's just I feel like I'm done with the premise of or the synopsis of the show, because it's just like parody things being like put into action. I thought it was a hilarious comedy. This show always has a new trick up its sleeve.
It does try a lot of interesting things. I'll say that. Just like with Musume, I felt that the first episode of Mahou Shoujo Ore is incredibly strong. When the show's premise was announced, I was thinking to myself, well, this could work, or it's going to be a complete and utter disaster. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on my plan to watch list and check it out. And yeah, immediately everything about the show, from just the opening to the start to some of the like kind of like, you know, something weird is going on when the character, instead of running out of the house with a mouthful of toast, is running out of the house with a plate full of like pancakes. And it's like, oh, okay, this is the kind of absurd shit we're getting into right now. Cool.
Yeah.
And then everything involved, like once you get through the basic character introductions and the premise, and you know the fact that Saki's in love with Mohiro, and we get to the introduction of like what the magical girl is all about, like becoming one is all about, through freaking oh god, what's the fairy's name? Kokoro-chan. Yeah, Kokoro-chan is the first sign where you're like, oh, this is gonna be interesting. And he's like,
I love Kokoro-chan. He's like this Yakuza themed dude, but he's actually like the contract holder for the Mahou Shoujos
in the city. Yeah, it's great. It's like, yeah, and then once you start to like understand what it means to be a magical girl, you're like, yeah, of course they would actually need almost like a Yakuza in order to make this work, in order to hold people up to their contract. Because once you become a magical girl, holy crap, you might have some reservations, because guess what? Not only do you transform into a giant buff dude, but everything you think you knew about becoming a magical girl has been subverted, such as not having actual laser weapons or fancy final attacks.
There's no actual magic. They just beat everyone up.
No, because Kokoro-chan's like, look, it's not practical to do like laser effects or anything to defeat the forces of evil. Here's a giant staff. It's got a jewel in the middle that's gonna fill up with the blood of the enemies you defeat. Go beat the shit out of these demons. And the demons, of course,
the demons are giant fucking teddy bears.
They're giant fucking squirrel teddy bears that make like cute noises. And everything about this show is just outlandish from the start, from like just from scene one. And like it again, this first episode basically spends 22 to 24 minutes completely taking the piss out of the most typical magical girl conventions in a way that's just jaw-droppingly funny. You know, I mean, yeah, Kokoro-chan saying, yeah, it's just practical for you to do this. It's really funny when the guy's like, but what is, like, just the outfit itself is not practical. It involves a lot of underwear flashing throughout many of the first episodes. It's not practical at all. So it's, I really want to credit the voice actors on this entire show. They have so much lifting to do in this, especially the voice actors for the characters post-transformation sequence. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to Ore and whatever Sakuyo's transformation is named, I always forget, as she's, just in order to make things simple for the rest of this conversation. But, you know, the fact that these voice actors have to convey the thoughts and feelings of understandably confused and embarrassed teenage girls while retaining the timbre and rhythm of adult male, like super duper dude voices that the characters physically inhabit is phenomenal. It is real, especially Saki. Saki, that's right. Duh, because it's a pun. That Sakuyo's transformation is also named Saki, because of course it is. Is a real treat in the show, in my opinion. I felt that among the episodes, I actually really enjoyed episode 6. I felt that it's the hot springs episode.
Oh, that episode was wonderful.
It's probably the best at really tying together multiple threads. It's the best at developing the love triangle, and again, we have a love triangle quad. I mean, you know what? In the end, it winds up being like a hexagon, so I'm not even gonna bother with describing what term to use. But basically,
nobody loves the right person.
Nobody loves the right person. But basically, it helps develop like actual, genuine notions of there being any kind of like chemistry between Mohiro and Ore, although it's mostly played up to comedic effect because Ore is in a really funny misunderstanding situation in the hot tub or the hot springs with a almost entirely, and at some points entirely naked Mohiro. As well as just after Sakuyo has developed, confessed her feelings, also been able to transform, there's some like lingering like tension about what does that mean for Saki. And that gets really built up upon the episode in terms of Sakuyo saving Saki through her Saki form. Again, this is really confusing. Yeah, and another small little thing about that episode is that it does touch on some of the less glamorous side of idol work, because the whole reason why they're at this hot spring is to do like a idol performance, but they get completely like pushed to the side by the chairman who runs the hot springs for his performance. Mm-hmm. So it's like done as a favor, but then they don't even get to perform or anything. So
I found like just like on the idol aspect of the show, I found it really funny that as cute girls, they're just completely ignored. Like Saki and oh my goodness, I can't remember the other character's name.
Sakuyo?
Saki and Sakuyo are an idol group when the show begins, and they're absolutely terrible at it. But when they transform into magical girls, they're like really good and super popular. They're just these huge fucking buff dudes in like idol girl dresses.
Yep.
And it's like, there's the subversion, right? It's like
there's a couple.
Everything's better when you're a big buff dude in a dress.
Part of the subversion I think really worked, and also I think the show should get a lot of credit for, as a adaptation of a manga, going forward with the addition of anime only characters and actually like including them in multiple episodes in subtle and then outright stated ways, which involves the two Prisma girls. They're actually anime exclusive. They're not in the original story in the manga, who are Ruka and Michiru, because part of the subversive aspect is those two girls are basically the idol group that's on top at the start of the story, and the rise of the magical girls deposes them as the premier idol group.
I love what they do with that. They go and become magical girls, and then Rookie, I think it is, ends up just becoming an old dude.
It's actually it is about the names. So Michiru is actually the tsundere blonde who becomes the old. So the funny thing is that like when they transform into the magical girls, they're supposed to transform proportionate to their age, kind of. We see that with Saki's mom later at one point when she transforms back into her form. Because again, part of the conceit of the story and why Saki is chosen to be a magical girl is that her mom was actually the magical girl in the city for decades. And so it was natural that she would pass that on to her daughter with a little push. That's part of the story. But yeah, so typically they turn into really hot young men, really strong, hot young men. And the fairy that makes the contract with Ruka and Michiru says that Michiru doesn't have enough love power to hold the
Yep.
form, and so it's gonna be a limited age form, and so we find out that it just means that her magical girl form ages like 3 to 4 to 5 times as rapidly as the other girls. So by the time we last see her in her transformed form, she's like become a tanned, incredibly old but still buff man. So that's great. And also, I really liked Ruka. Like, she has one of the best lines in the show when they're doing the proper confession scene, because she's in love with Michiru, who's in love with Ore. So there's two characters in love with Ore, which is Saki's magical form that she's embarrassed about. Which is
And then Ore is in love with, or Saki slash Ore is in love with Mohiro.
yeah,
Mohiro seems to be in love with Ore, but not Saki.
yep. Because Mohiro is gay.
He could never talk to Ore.
But the line that Ruka tells Michiru when they're confessing is, "What, you couldn't tell I loved you by all my thirsty glances?" Which I thought was
so good.
And like, yeah, it could have been really easy for the writers of the show to take the two Prisma girls, and like barely include them throughout the series. Maybe just not even with the passing references. They could have just thrown them in later on in one episode and just been like, "Oh yeah, these girls have existed the whole time at the top of the idol industry." But they didn't. They had like they showed clips of them early on in the season, and then they're there, I want to say episode 5 or 7 at the idol group signing event, which is when
that was a good episode.
Yeah, it was a good episode. And so like they're part of the world, which is important. And again, there's nothing to refer to. They're completely original characters. So definitely a lot of credit to the writing staff on this show. Do you know who made this show? I don't know if we got to
Piero
that.
Plus.
Do you know what they've done?
Piero Plus has done Beelzebub, Tokyo Ghoul, bunch of other shows I've never heard of.
Oh, okay. So did it seem like they're
main
new?
No, they're an offshoot of Studio Piero.
Oh, okay.
Whatnot.
That makes sense.
They've only done a few series. The only one I've like really heard of is Beelzebub.
Apparently,
Beelzebub.
episode 5 is supposed to be like a self-parody of working at Piero.
Yeah, I absolutely adored the anime industry parody episode.
Yeah.
With like commentators like trying to like, oh my god.
I could understand if episode 5 lost a lot of people who were just not willing to endure the meta-ness of that particular episode, but like again, it just everything resets more or less afterwards, so who cares? So yeah, I thought it was good. Let me think here. I'll say this. First off, the main twist of who's responsible for the demons made me so embarrassed I couldn't figure it out. I felt so stupid about it.
Same.
I felt
when
like
they went to the end game and like started like, it was kind of funny because when they started building a plot, I was like deathly afraid for where the show was going.
Definitely. I thought it was going to be the stupid thing, and they were going to make it so that Hyoe, who is Mohiro's partner in their idol...
Definitely not boyfriend.
Definitely not boyfriend, but definitely like always having this very stock, pleased with himself, if not quasi-borderline villain status facial expression. And it was like... Yeah. Everything about that was like they're pushing you in this direction, and you think the show might just do it, and then it's like it winds up being their Saki and Sakuryo's own manager, and you're just like, oh,
and the motivation is so perfect. He's just an idol, magical girl fanatic
who happens to be a demon.
He's a demon lord. He's like in charge of an entire wing of demons. He's like King Yama in Dragon Ball.
And instead of just relishing in being stuck doing demonic
It's
diploma.
funny. He wants to like be gone with the demon world because he's tired of doing paperwork.
And so he seizes this opportunity to go to a world where there's real magical girls. And then upon getting here, he realizes there isn't. He falls into a deep depression and becomes a NEET.
He becomes a NEET, and the only reason he does anything is because the demon world cuts off his money.
And then he finally finds actual magical girls because I think he overhears a conversation between Kokoro-chan and Saki's mom about everything. And then he's like, "Oh my god!" And they try to do some establishing that he's like, "Yeah, I also am a big idol fan. Like, I actually really loved you guys."
He put a lot of heart into it. Is like what they were trying to establish.
Yeah, and so we don't get like a villain. We do not get a very typical.
It's the
heroes.
Perfect villain for this show.
Yes, and we don't get like a very stock heroes versus villain final battle. Instead, we just get everybody teaming up to face the horde of remaining demon underlings who've gained some degree of self-preservation and realized, holy crap, we're going to keep dying if we keep doing this. So, yeah, it's apparently reincarnation and regeneration is not fun. Celeste, what did you think about some of the meta commentary about the idol industry?
I can't comment because I know absolutely fucking nothing about idol culture and the idol industry.
But you don't feel like you gleaned anything from the show about it?
I don't feel like it. I just don't have enough context to really say anything.
Okay.
There's an idol aspect there, and I just can't follow any narrative with it.
For sure.
I need to watch more idol shows.
What about the animation of the show? I know they make a meta joke in the final episode about the animation quality dipping deliberately as like part of the villain's final plan, which is funny. But do you think that the animation of the show might wind up turning people off on it?
Honestly, I'm gonna say no because I think the comedy and the premise and like the sheer absurdity of everything carries this show fine. If you're looking for like great animation in a show like this, you might be looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, it's definitely not.
It's not a Sakuga show. It's never intending to be a Sakuga show.
Most of the bulk of any kind of like creative animation in this show is usually in order to bolster the comedy, and less so the action. I mean, they usually make use of their budget with the action by usually just showing the aftermath of censored out, bloodied bodies everywhere. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I think I can definitely see people maybe approaching the show, and even despite like having an understanding of what the show is going for, possibly being turned off by the animation. But I really hope not. I really don't think it should be a barrier for enjoying the show. I think the show is definitely funny enough to be worth a watch. I ultimately wound up rating the show at 6, largely because I felt that it did its one very specific parody very well, but I don't think it had a lot to say about magical girls beyond just being like, hey, how absurd can we actually make this in and of itself absurd premise be? And I'm not really sure what the show could have done to really accomplish that. So it's a weird criticism where I just acknowledge one of the show's limitations with that. I also think they tried to stretch out gags maybe far too long. Like, for example, with the hot springs episode, I felt like they just kept on with the Mohiro and Ore thing just a touch too long. But I mean, sometimes part of doing comedy is taking something and trying to extend it as long as you can. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, like, it's a very tightly wound narrative. It doesn't really concern itself with a lot of stuff outside of what's mainly going on, aside from episode 4 and 5 might be the biggest detours from the main story. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, are there any, like, what would you ask me that might help with explaining why I gave it a 6 instead of something higher? There's got to be something that I can, like, I can't put my finger on it exactly why I don't think this show is worthy of a 7.
Do you feel that the characters are weak?
Yeah, I do think that. Oh, thank you. You actually did point out what it was. I felt that the romance aspect, which is, for me, it doesn't have to be that defining a feature, but I felt like there's like a basic amount of foundation for it. And aside from the childhood friends flashback episode and the hot springs episode, and maybe some development in the end game, there's just not enough there to really make me care about the characters caring about one another, except for, like, I care enough to be informed so that I can understand the comedic interactions between everybody.
My only like response to that kind of thing, like I think in a show like this, like in this show specifically, I don't think that the characters need to be very strongly written. In fact, I almost want to say that it's entirely the point that the characters are weak and kind of flimsy. Because one of the tropes that I feel like the show is trying to parody is that Mahou Shoujo characters are supposed to be deep and have like all this backstory, and
That's what the stupid common parody guy is supposed to be about. Doesn't he like complain like, you're supposed to have dark storylines? Ah, crap! I'm that guy. Great.
I gave this show a 7 out of 10. I think as a parody, it is extremely positive. It pretty much, I'm not going to say that this is a deconstruction. It is not a deconstruction. It is purely a parody. It's aiming to poke fun at the tropes of Mahou Shoujo and does a wonderfully competent job at that. I think that the way that Mahou Shoujo Array parodies Magical Girl as a genre is as strong, if not a little stronger, than One Punch Man parodies shonen. But I'm not willing to give it a stronger score than One Punch Man, which I also gave a 7, purely because One Punch Man also does other things where they have these very emotionally gripping counter narratives between their characters, like Saitama's, like the way Saitama kind of like responds to the criticism, like that's a kind of like a really good story.
I like the Kamen Rider versus the C-Teen scene.
Exactly. Like that's like really powerful character writing that gets me invested in the world. That kind of, I feel, detracts from the parody aspect because it brings it more closely in line with just actual shonen.
For sure.
It's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, as purely a parody series, Mahou Shoujo Array is much more effective at pointing out the flaws of a show like
Cardcaptor Sakura.
Cardcaptor Sakura. Even Madoka Magica. Everyone says Madoka's the best, which is not true. It's Princess Tutu all year long.
And before... Oh, sorry. Go on.
Oh, I was just going to kind of finish what I was saying. Like, okay. Mahou Shoujo Array is like my favorite parody show I've ever seen. It's perfect.
Word. We did not cover the OP and ED from Musume. It was my mistake, but we can talk about all of the OPs and EDs right now. Definitely the OPs for both Musume and Mahou Shoujo Array are excellent. Like, Musume has got such a ton of great original animation in the opening, and the song is incredibly catchy.
I love both of the pop songs for the OPs.
Yeah, and
they're really good. Like, they capture the spirits of their respective shows, like, top notch.
And the OP for Mahou Shoujo Array has these wonderful little dance sequences, and it really gets you to know like all the main characters in the cast too. Like you get, all their personality just comes screaming off the screen. And both EDs are pretty alright.
Both EDs are kind of generic. I think Mahou Shoujo Array's ED is a little bit better than Musume, or Sorry, I said that backwards.
Uma
Uma
Musume's
Musume's ED is a little bit better than Mahou Shoujo Arrays
for sure.
because it's got all these popping colors and like fluid animation.
Yeah, even
It's
though it's
nothing
a lot of it's like
it's
specific
nothing
like
like
scenes.
amazing or spectacular. It's no Haruhi dance
Yeah, no,
ED.
no, neither of these are. But yeah, definitely. Check out both these shows. We generally speaking agree that we both recommend Uma Musume Pre-Derby and Mahou Shoujo Ore to any of our listeners. And with that,
I
thank
will
you.
actually put a caveat on my recommendation for Mahou Shoujo Ore. If you've never seen a magical girl show, do not watch Mahou Shoujo Ore. You will hate it. Go
All right.
watch Madoka.
Yeah, go watch Madoka and Card Captors, and then come back and watch Ore. But again, if you're listening to this, it's part of our spring in 2018 review. Hopefully we should have the rest of the review episodes up as part of a playlist, and just hopefully it'll segue to the next one. Otherwise, for Fro signing out. This end of the podcast. And Celes
Saying goodbye.
all right.